Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Low Carb Lifestyle Podcast. Today, I am here with Dr. Pete Delannoy, who is a biochemist and now a keto coach. And Peter and I connected recently through the Nutrition Network coaching certification program. And it was such a pleasure to meet Peter and hear about the amazing work that he is doing, and of course, the transformation and life changes that he's experienced with himself within his health. So I wanted to bring him on and introduce you all to him as well. And I know you're really going to enjoy what Dr. Pete has to say. So welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to our discussion, and make sure that your audience knows what a fantastic teacher you are and mentor. I was really honored to be able to learn from you over the course of our work in Nutrition Network. It was awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. That's really kind. It was definitely, the honor was all mine. I think what I've realized, obviously all the life-changing things that happen when we go low carb in terms of our physical health and our mental health. But to me, it's the people, and the global community that we can become a part of. And I absolutely love meeting people like yourself and hearing their story. So, yeah, the pleasure was all mine. But I'd love you to share how does someone go from a biochemist to a keto coach? What's the story?
Well, my story started in 2016. I was diagnosed with gout, and then in 2019, prediabetes. And at the time, between the time frame between the gout and the diabetes, I think I more or less was like everyone else. Just going along thinking, well, I'm just getting older. That's why I have this problem. And when you're visiting with the doctor, they sort of like they enable that idea in a lot of respects, because they're like, well, just take this and it should take care of the problem. Try to get a little more exercise and eat well. Well, in the transition between the gout and the diabetes, the prediabetes, I started going to CrossFit. So when I got the diagnosis on the prediabetes, I'd already been doing CrossFit for 3 years. And so when I got the email that basically said, get more exercise and eat the Mediterranean diet, that impacted me really, in a negative way. I think on the first hand, it made me look at my life really critically. Because with the CrossFit, yeah, I was super active, but I was about to learn that, there are other factors in your lifestyle that probably rank higher in importance, like, what you're putting in your mouth every day. And I believe, like a lot of people, that, I was eating a healthy diet, and the 3 beers that I was having every day couldn't possibly be affecting me, because I was doing CrossFit at 5 a.m. to burn it all off. And you have this sort of naive viewpoint about things. But the prediabetes really woke me up, because being a biochemist, I went into the medical literature, and on the first level, everything that you read is grim. The best that they can offer you is long-term management, a massive proportion. I don't remember what the number is at this point, but a massive proportion of people with prediabetes transition to full-blown type 2 diabetes. And when you look at the outcomes there and whatnot, it's pretty bad. And so I was starting to feel, as a biochemist, I knew that there had to be some kind of solution, or at least I felt that intuitively, because I understood at least that diabetes is metabolic. I mean, I knew that much. And I feel like, looking back, I should have known more. Like, I should have been asking questions about the sugar and the carbohydrates, but at the time I wasn't. But I got to the point where I went into the gym one day and I ran into the owner there, and I almost was in tears because I'd had this breakfast and I was following the doctor's recommendations. I actually measured out the amount of black beans I put on my plate, and along with the eggs, and I measured out the amount of I think I had rice on there too. And then I measured my blood sugar before I went to the CrossFit gym, and it was really high, you know. And I didn't understand that. I was like, okay, I'm following these guidelines exactly, you know. Um, and then when I got to the gym and I did my workout, and I ran into this guy. His name is Reagan, by the way. I'm just he could be listening for all I know. Anyway, I really attribute him to setting me on the right road, because he said, you know what, it's because of the carbs. That's what's going on. And you should watch this video by Dr. Sarah Hallberg on it's a TED Talk. So, you know, I went home and I watched that. And for me, that's when the light bulb went off. You know, it was an aha moment. I just was like, and being a biochemist and also the shopper and the cooker in the family, I was like, all right, well, you know, without knowing anything about low carb, I knew enough to know what needed to be on the plate and what needed not to be there. So I went to the store that afternoon and started eating that way, low carb, that very night. And then, you know, started just devouring. Once I got to Sarah Hallberg, I got to Virta Health, and the rest is, you know, history now, because then I was able to get underneath the medical literature and find my way into this, you know, vast. I mean, it really is vast. When you look at it, low carb goes back into the mid 1800s with documented papers. And when you listen to the establishment pushing back on this, saying there's no data, and it's like, no, you guys, I don't think so. There's a ton of stuff going back a really long way. And so basically, I took the first Virta studies, the 1 year study, and I think they had a preprint for the second year. And I put those down on a table, and I just constructed my lifestyle from that, and, you know, came up with the same. I did all of the biomarkers that a convenient layperson can go and do, you know, and I put that into my lifestyle, and I'm still, you know, I've evolved, right? I feel like I love the lifestyle and I love the food. In the beginning, it was pretty basic stuff, like my plate. I think I maybe complain the same way some other people that are new in this will complain. Well, I look at the plate and there's nothing on there. But, you know, a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you're a carboholic, you're used to having these massive plates, because you feel like you've got to eat that much so that you're not hungry an hour after you're finished, you know. And now 3 years into this, you know, everything's different. So anyway, it was in that process that I actually became fairly angry. I'm like, you know, this should be out there. People should know about this, so that if this happens to you, and I don't need to tell you this, but people that are my age, 60 years old, over 52% of us are pre-diabetic or diabetic, along with the other issues, cardiovascular disease and whatnot. And I think that people deserve to know that there's another way, and that other way, the other fork in the road, doesn't involve massive reams of medications and, you know, having to start scaling your life down, you know.
It's interesting, the thinking that a lot of people have when they first come to it. It's kind of like, oh, well, what am I going to eat? You know, like even yesterday, I had a potential, you know, client just send me a message saying, oh, look, I'm really interested in what you do, but I can't give up pasta. You know, we automatically go to what we're missing out on, what we're going to lose. And I think it is such a common scenario. But as you say, once you are, you know, like anything, once you get into it and you see just how different you feel, and you feel so different, and you're not hungry, you don't need to eat those massive amounts of food, you can't unsee it. And yeah, I mean, it becomes something that the possibilities, exactly what you said, is what drives me every day to do what I do. and share what I share, because I just want to show people that there is another alternative, because they often don't get that alternative from, the medical establishment.
Absolutely. And so for me, with that knowledge, I wanted to help people, so I became a coach. And the first thing I bumped up against is what you're describing, and that is there's so much resistance, and including misinformation about this too. And when I look at what my life is like now compared to what it was before, and you start realizing how much more energy you have, you know, the fact that athletically, I don't have any negatives. Like in the beginning, people are telling you, well, you're never going to be able to lift heavy weights or any of that stuff, and it's just not true. And I do some extreme sports. I'm a cave diver and rock climber, and I have not noticed with the rock climbing. Actually, I think that I actually feel like I have more endurance. I don't have any science behind that, but that's how I feel, and I don't know about you, but I don't have to worry about hitting the wall anymore, like in the court. I just remember in the old days, first thing I used to think about in the morning is what I was going to eat all day.
Yes, me too. Food consumed pretty much everything in my mind. As soon as I finished a meal, my mind was, okay, what's going to be the next one? I was hungry all the time.
Right.
Didn't get it. Yeah.
And getting heavier.
Yep. I was a personal trainer, Pete. I was a fat personal trainer, and I got diagnosed with prediabetes at 40, and I couldn't understand it. I was doing everything I was told, exactly like you described. And then I think, when I saw the light and had my epiphany moments and went down the rabbit holes that we all do, I'm kind of like, oh my goodness, what have I told people for the last 12 years? I have to undo that. I have to try and undo what I've done.
Yeah, because I think back to the days when I was really hammering out on the climbing, and I think about what I used to take to the cliffs with me, and the sugar and all of the stuff I used to carry there that I was eating all day long. That probably accelerated the program, and I was thinking today before we met, because now my wife and her sister, my sister-in-law, they both have started doing their numbers when I do my numbers, and I was thinking about this, that if we started periodically looking at a much wider selection of biomarkers when people, starting with kids when they're children, because, and part of where I'm coming from with this has to do with the gout. Like I've started really researching that heavy, and we just don't have good data on uric acid dating back into children because we don't measure it. It's not measured until somebody limps into the doctor's office with this red lump on their foot and goes, what is this? Then they take an x-ray and measure your uric acid, and it's like, well, if I argue about the uric acid, like I think all these biomarkers, if we started measuring these things earlier in a wider range, we could tweak lifestyles a lot earlier. And I tell my daughter that, if you're smart, you're going to trim off the amount of carbs you're eating, mainly like push back on the sugar and watch out how much alcohol you're having, try to get some moderation in here. And she's doing pretty good on keto, but, I think that the young people out there don't realize how much danger they're in. And, if you wait until you're 63 to get an email like that, then you've already got the numbers and you've already got a few decades worth of damage, and you can't fix that stuff overnight, No,
it's so true. I think what you say about young people, and, it's worse now than it was. I think when I was growing up, it is just the processed food environment. and the push for, obviously plant-based, and whatever Mediterranean is, like all this stuff that is pushed onto them. And I've got 3 teenage kids, and honestly, it shocks me, the diet of their friends, and they're either not eating, or when they do eat, they're eating rubbish. And they've just got zero, any education they get is dietary guidelines. you know
Yeah.
and it does, it's kind of like, I was lucky that I was overweight, and I got a sign at 40, but I was still fit, like, even though I was fat, I was fit. But a lot of people don't, they aren't as lucky as that. They don't get those early signs. And, it does worry me, because I think we're heading so fast down this path of, having to unravel a whole lot of stuff. Yeah, I agree. That's all I'm trying to say, I guess. I just find it concerns me a lot too.
And you hear discussions, or I hear discussions, being in my age group, because I didn't really retire. I quit teaching and went into this trying to do what I'm doing. Um, but my wife just retired this year, and then we have friends who are in the process of retiring, and when we're sitting around uh, having a meal or something, and we're talking about this kind of stuff, I hear sometimes, I've actually heard from a good friend in a conversation, well, I'm not planning to be around, and it's like, okay, one thing, there's a lot of things I think that happen as we age. One of those is that time starts to just fly by, right?
Yeah.
And I'm 63 right now, and I have no, I think I'm not in the weeds when I think, okay, 73 is going to come pretty fast, and the time frame in which that comment was made was in the 70s, and that's only a decade away. And are you really serious? You're planning on not being around for the 70s, and chronic disease is like, it's a slow cooker. It's not usually a fast one, unless you end up dying from a heart attack from it. Usually it's a prolonged thing. And I'm like, I kind of don't get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe in our world society, I don't know how it is in Australia, if it's exactly the same. But I think here in the United States, there's this mentality. Well, if I get sick, they'll have a pill for it,
Yeah.
or there'll be some kind of a solution. But diabetes is not that way.
No. No. Yeah, it's very similar here. I think I had that discussion. I had Dr. Ben Bickman on last year. I interviewed him, and we had that exact discussion. That I think that is a big thing. A lot of people don't realize that lifestyle diseases, there's no pill for it, and they can keep you alive for a very long time in a very poor state. So it's about, what sort of lifestyle do you want to have? You almost do have to make that choice. Otherwise, you will end up, alive, but with what? And being able to do what, like, I don't know. I want to be able to be a you're fantastic. You're a grandfather. I can't, you are a grandparent.
No, not yet.
Oh, sorry.
My
Where did
daughter,
I get that from?
I think she's engaged, right? So, but the point is well taken, because that's in the future, grandkids, and I want to take them climbing, and I would like to go scuba diving with them. My daughter and my daughter doesn't cave dive, but we enjoy going to places where you can scuba, like on reefs and that. And I would love to do that with my grandchildren, right? But
Yep.
my grandchildren aren't going to be old enough for that until I'm in probably my mid or late 70s, maybe.
Yep.
I could
Yep.
be early 80 when this happens, for all I know. I don't know. And you got to ask yourself, what kind of condition do you want to be in? And I don't have any plans on being in a nursing home on a bottle of oxygen, So
Yeah.
I don't know. I used to sit around when I was a young kid, going back into the climbing days, thinking that I could live the way I was living and it didn't matter because being 60 or 70, well, that was many decades away from where I am right now. So I've got life to burn right now. I've got leeway. And then one day you wake up and you are in your 60s, or like in your
Yeah.
case, in your 40s, and you're pre-diabetic, and you realize, okay, I don't actually feel that way anymore. I don't feel like I did when I was young, and I probably shouldn't have felt that way. And been living the way I was. I should have probably taken some caution back then. But
But
so anyway, here we
yeah,
are.
yeah. Here we are. Exactly, exactly. I would love to come to the cave diving and ask you a little bit about that. Before I do, though, I've actually never had anyone on the podcast talk about gout. And I know that obviously it's something that is of interest to you and a big specialty. And I'm going to link your podcast below. I know you've got a lot of podcasts talking about the subject. But are you able to give a little bit of just what is it for people that don't know what it is? I think there's a little bit of a myth out there that low carb can cause gout, and there may be, what's going on there. Can it cause flare ups? But really, how can what's the mechanism, I guess, behind keto or low carb and really putting that condition in remission?
So first, the question is the gout before we talk about how to put it in remission. Gout is a systemic inflammatory disease that is related to the same core driver that drives diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. There's 43 million people in the US walking around that are hyperuricemic. So high uric acid is something that, relatively speaking, is at least as endemic in our population as the diabetic, the obesity, the cardiovascular issue. And the gout is driven by the same core things. So I have come to favor Johnson's work, Dr. Richard Johnson's work, who has taken insulin resistance now to another level, which he brings it inside the liver, looking at the relationship of fructose. And without going into the weeds, I think it's safe to say that insulin resistance, or the inability of the insulin expression to drive glucose into cells, which is driving the diabetic thing, is the same driver that you have for gout. And some people are going to say, well, I think most people on the surface of it, when they first are diagnosed with one of these things, they're going to maybe have the mentality, or at least this has been my experience. You can let me know how you feel about it, but they tend to think that this is some sort of like individual disease that can be treated by some sort of singular thing. Give me a pill, inject me with insulin, it's going to go away. And what they need to think about, or what I would ask them to think about, is what happens if all of these diseases together in a collection, the migraines, the gout, the diabetes, the obesity, the cardiovascular disease, what if these are the response that you have environmentally for an individual? Because we all have different genetics and how we're going to respond to this environment, and then we're all slightly different in how we're creating this environment that we're consuming. So, there's, I think, 9 million gout sufferers in the US, and this is just one aspect of this expression, right? How these individuals, including myself, respond to this environment that includes alcohol, fructose, and glucose. And there's a concept, and this doesn't belong to me, but I put a name to it because I couldn't figure out how to talk about it in simple terms. But I call it simultaneous excess calories, because this is the typical way that people eat the standard American meal. And what I mean by this is that you sit down, you have this plate that's covered in food there's going to be a high glucose load in there. And like you brought up a little while ago, if there's processed food in there, there's going to be high fructose corn syrup, So there's going to be fructose, there's going to be glucose in there coming from the potatoes, and Lord knows what else that they've got, the breaded chicken, and they're probably having a glass of alcohol of some type, and so what that means, simultaneous excessive calories, is that before they put anything in their mouth, you got this liver sitting there, all right, and it's waiting. And all of a sudden, it's going to have a high concentration of alcohol showing up. It's going to have a high concentration of glucose and a high concentration of fructose. And this is driving a major inflammatory cascade. And I believe, and I could be wrong. Look, this is a hypothesis, right? And I don't have a clinic, and I don't have a laboratory full of people that can do these experiments. But I've spent hundreds of hours looking through these different aspects of the literature, and I believe that you have the same thing in a gout sufferer going on that you have in the liver, and you have specialized biological cells that are there, and if you have that have to metabolize, and if you have a hyperglycemic event in the circulatory system and have a high load of fructose and a high load of alcohol, there's data going back into the mid-1900s that the synovial fluid that bathes these biological cells are also going to be hyperglycemic. They're also going to have a comparable fructose load, and they're also going to have, if I didn't say it already, the alcohol. So you have all three of those things there. There's no reason to think that the specific biological cell in the synovial fluid called the chondrocyte is not going to be having a heck of a time. Because it's going to be, it turns out that cell actually specializes in processing glucose, and it's in a hypoxic environment where uric acid is going to get formed inside the cell, and so you have three things that activate the conversion of glucose to fructose, and then this inflammatory cascade. And I think that in the gout sufferer, that you have this perfect storm. You have the combination of all three of these things that are descending on the chondrocyte, and then you have this inflammatory response that involves the immune system. Some would argue it's an autoimmunity. So you have these other players that get involved, and when the conditions are right, then you can have a gout flare. And the establishment, like what most people think is, oh, well, if you have uric acid in the joint, if you have those crystals, then you can have gout. No, it's not that simple. A urate, sodium urate crystal, or uric acid, to keep things as simple as possible, is not sufficient. You need the crystal, and then you need these other protein components. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds with this. So there's a number of things that you need that have to come together to have that gout flare. Which is, I think, one of the main reasons why people who are hyperuricemic, there's 43, I've seen higher numbers than that, but the NHANES study, 43 million people in the US, this is not a world number, it's actually bigger in the world, have high uric acid in their circulatory system, but they're not having gout attacks. And the reason why I think they're not having the gout attacks is because you need this perfect storm to come together to have that happen. And it's not going to happen in everyone, because we have different ways, we have different genetics that are responding to that simultaneous excess calorie environment. So some of us are more susceptible to actually having the gout flare than others. And one of the issues with it is once you have it, most of the experts in this field think that you've got it the rest of your life. And I think maybe that's because of the architecture in the joint. You do some damage there, and maybe that offers, this molecular environment now where if you have the perfect storm come together again, it's easier to have the flare maybe. I don't know. That's just pure speculation. Yeah. But then coming to the keto diet, this is the other side of that coin. How do you find a way of eating that puts gout in remission? That's a really, really good question. And am I right about this? And I tell everyone I talk to on my own podcast, I don't know exactly, but I feel like that I have some serious clues. And the first is that when I went onto the ketogenic diet, this is a question directly that you asked me. You do see a rise in uric acid. Can be a pretty hefty spike. It's going to go up, and the reason that happens is because when you start to burn the fat, right? You've dropped the carbohydrates, you bring the insulin down, so now we're burning the fat. You produce the ketones, right? Because as a result of burning the fat, then you have these small fat molecules that are called the ketones. I know that you know that already, but that's for the people that are listening. And at least one of those ketones is an organic acid. And when the levels come up high enough in the circulatory system, that some of that beta hydroxybutyrate, the acid, is going to be excreted at the level of the urine. And when that happens, it competes with the uric acid. So the uric acid rises. That spike can be massive. I measured uric acid in myself. I have a handheld meter that I use all the time. And I do N1s on myself all the time. And I know that in that period of time when my uric acid was spiking, that I had some values that were up close to 13 milligrams per deciliter of uric acid. I mean, they were if I'd gone to the doctor, he would have been like, all right, let's put you on allopurinol right now. But here's the interesting thing, Tracy. I did not have a gout flare until 4 months into the ketogenic diet. And then I had a mild one. And so what is a mild gout flare? All right, when I had my gout attack in 2016, on a scale of 1 to 10, the doctor's going to ask you that. He's going to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad does this hurt? It's a 10. I was like, this is a 10. Now, the fact that I rock climbed all my life, and I could tell you I've been in some pretty extreme stuff, I just gutted that pain out. I think the doctor was a little bit suspect of 10, but I'm telling you, it was 10. Like, I had to really okay, I'm walking whether I like it or not, right? But when I had the gout flare 4 months into the ketogenic diet, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 1. I'm not joking about that. I didn't have to take any ibuprofen, and I didn't stop going to CrossFit. Why did I know it was there? Because I didn't have any aching in that joint at all. And then all of a sudden, for about 5 days, it was, this just gentle throb. Now, what happens is, and this has to do with keto adaptation, and I don't think, I know that the people that actually have laboratories that are working on this, they don't know why the uric acid starts to come back down. You would think, because I'm running ketones all the time, like this morning, my ketones were 0.8 when I got up, all right? And yesterday afternoon, right before dinner, they were 1.3. So I'm running ketones all the time. So and my uric acid still is relatively high when compared to the reference range. The reference range goes from 4 to 8, and I'm running between 7 and 8 without allopurinol. So this is kind of a complicated story. Just stop me if I get out of hand with it. So what happens after the spike is uric acid comes back down. And I tracked that. I could show you data. It came back down. I wasn't having values between 12 and 13 anymore. So why does that happen? Because keto adaptation seems to be the issue with the kidneys and, I don't know, the other organ systems. No one really knows. I don't think has a good argument as to why that happens, just that it does. Now, there's some people, and you know this person. I think I have permission to say her name. Tia. Basically all we have right now for information in this area are case studies, and she will tell her story. I should let her do that, but I think, and I also see this with some of my clients, but I got to be careful here not to talk about them in sort of on an individual basis. But for people that start out significantly overweight, type 2 diabetes, and they reverse it on a ketogenic diet, so their weight comes way down, they, their biomarkers all correct. And Tia, if you haven't interviewed her, you should, man. Her story is amazing. She came off 22 medications.
She's coming up next.
Okay, awesome. People need to hear her story. I'm going to have her again too, because it's so compelling. People need to understand that they can do this and have remarkable outcomes. In any case, her uric acid dropped all the way down into the normal range between 4 and 8. Mine has dropped to 7. Now, I believe, and there's no science for this yet, but I believe that gout sufferers are more at most at risk for a gout flare when the uric acid is either moving up in a dynamic way, like there's a dynamic shift going on because of something they ate. It could be you had a drink with 2 shots of whiskey in it. And that would do it. I can tell you that right now. Uric acid would probably go up 4 units. How do I know that? Because I did it. Because I had a drink. This was a long time ago now, but I did it. I checked the uric acid before I had it, and I checked at half an hour, 1 hour, and 2 hours. And at the 1 hour, I was up 4 units, back to 12 mg per deciliter. So there's a massive shift going on there from where I started to where I finished before it starts coming back down. And I think that's when gout sufferers are most vulnerable to another attack, not when it's static. So I had another gout flare, and I've been playing around with this, trying to understand how I can help people have a better life with this. So I did go on allopurinol. And this was 2 years after the gout flare I told you about, right? My uric acid was stable. This is in recent times. I'm actively doing N1s with this right now. And I went on to allopurinol. I convinced my doctor to just give me this prescription, and then I was going to titrate myself. So I got 100 milligram tablets. I started out, I spent 2 weeks at 0.1, and then I spent 2 weeks at 0.2, and then I went up to 0.3. I went to 0.4, and then when I went to 0.5, there was a pretty dramatic shift down in my uric acid, between 4 and 5 mg per deciliter, and I had a gout flare.
Interesting.
Which is on, that's in the literature. There's plenty of data for that. When they put people on allopurinol, they tend to have gout flares. Now, what caused that? So really interesting, because number one, my average uric acid during that flare was 4.5 mg per deciliter. Just think about that for a minute, because remember earlier I said that you need more than a uric acid crystal for this. And when you've got uric acid dead in the middle of the reference range and you're having a gout flare, that's a major clue. Okay, dudes, there's something going on here besides just having the uric acid there. And what had happened that I saw was there was a major shift in my uric acid when I added the next 0.1 milligrams of allopurinol. And it was at that point where I was I was talking to people. I've been, I don't want to say collaborate, that's too strong a word, but I've been going back and forth with this medical doctor in Israel who treats people for gout. And there's really mixed feelings about the allopurinol story, or any drug to lower allopurinol, because of the effects it can have possibly on the kidneys. So I came off allopurinol. And I let myself come back up. And I'm working really hard to see if I can get my uric acid to come down with these other things. So anyway, I don't know how this sounds to you. Maybe it sounds like, well, did the ketogenic diet do any good at all? And the answer to that, I believe, is yeah. Because all the way through this whole thing, one has to remember that that we're producing beta hydroxybutyrate, and we're eating in such a way that we really hammer the systemic inflammation. Like, we're putting the inflammation in the ditch. So the 2 gout flares I have had in the last 3 years, keep that in mind too, in 3 years, have been ridiculously mild. Like not over 1. I would not put them over 1. So I think this is a good way to do it, to get the gout in remission, with some caveats. One, you can't go back to drinking alcohol. And I'm no saint. I still have some alcohol. I'm just really careful. I'm really careful about it. And I know what it can do. You also you have to stay away from anything that's got sugar in it, because the fructose, and then here's something that people don't understand at all. In fact, I was contacted by somebody, and they were explaining to me could not understand why they were having a gout flare, but they had consumed a whole bunch of bread. And I'm like, all right, listen, the hyperglycemia can cause gout. People don't understand because they go, well, there's no fructose there. There actually might be high fructose corn syrup in the dough, but all right, let's set that aside for a minute. They're going to go, there's no fructose there, and I didn't have any alcohol. So how's the glucose doing this? If you ever get a chance to have Dr. Richard Johnson on your program, you should do it, because he is the foremost expert in the world on how cells convert fructose into uric acid within the cell, but also on these pathways that allow cells to produce fructose endogenously. And when you have a hyperglycemic event, that is an activator of what we call the polyol pathway. And so the liver is going to start producing fructose endogenously. And then you get the massive burst of uric acid, which is what I think is going on in the joint itself. I think that the chondrocyte is having that same effect. You're generating this uric acid right inside the chondrocyte. When that happens, you have the inflammatory cascade, and you have all of this extracellular signaling that happens that brings in the innate immune system, and bammo, you can have a gout flare. So the ketogenic diet, I think, is a good solution for this, because you cut into the carbs, you produce beta hydroxybutyrate, which inhibits the inflammasomes that are required for this process. You have to have the NLRP3 inflammasome to have a gout flare, and beta hydroxybutyrate inhibits that thing. And then you drop the systemic inflammation, which means you lower the extracellular signaling that these biological cells, the chondrocyte, the liver, and whatnot, that would be, secreting these things to activate our immune system, well, the innate immune system, things like macrophages and neutrophils. So I think it's good. Does that mean that, and I think you can put gout in remission. Is this the end of the story? No, I don't think so. Are there other ways of eating that might work? And just like I say on my channel, I would be enthusiastic for other people to try some other things, and see if they don't get a better result, maybe. But I think whatever they do, they've got to cut the sugar and the alcohol, because I think those are the primary drivers. Whatever you want to do, if you want to be on a plant-based diet, go ahead. But you're going to have to think about the carbs, and you're going to have to cut the sugar and the alcohol, I think.
Yeah. And that's just talking about gout. I mean, there's all these other conditions we can talk about as well with, very sort of similar pathways. Can I just ask you a question? Do you think the high uric acid without the flare-up is an issue in the longer term? Like if you've got a high, you say you're constantly testing and your uric acid is higher, but you have no gout symptoms, is that still a concern?
I believe it is. And so here's the thing. I've been trying to keep this really simple.
Don't get too complex, but
I don't want you to get mad at me for going too far into the weeds with this. So it's like, okay, so we've been talking specifically about intracellular uric acid,
yeah.
which I think is the driver of gout. This process originates within the cell, and the cell gets really sick, mainly the chondrocyte, and it starts dumping extracellular signals. And I think the chondrocytes actually die. And there is some data for this that shows that in a gout joint that their chondrocytes are missing. Now let's do the flip side. What you just asked me is about extracellular uric acid. And the story behind circulating uric acid is really complicated. And honestly, I believe it's a mess. And when I reach out and I talk to people who are experts, like I had a conversation with Dr. Sives, and I know that you know him, right? He's been putting gout sufferers in remission using the ketogenic diet. And he's confronting the same thing that you asked me about, because a lot of these people like me, when the uric acid comes back down, it doesn't really come back into the reference range, or at least it stops at the top of the range, around 7 or 8. And it took a lot of work on my part to get him to talk to me. I finally just was blatant about it. I said, so do you know if 7 or 8 mg per deciliter of uric acid circulating is not causing harm? And he said, no, I don't know that. So I kind of think no one really knows the answer to your question. What I really worry about with this is that what I do know is that that uric acid has a dramatic effect on endothelial nitric oxide production. And I don't know if you get a chance to read this, the clot thickens, or get this guy on your
Malcolm?
His name is Dr. Malcolm Kendrick.
Yeah, I've followed him. I've read some of his stuff. I haven't read that book, no.
But he really, and this is going to be my next rabbit hole, because I think there's a relationship between circulating uric acid, the nitric oxide endothelial pathway, and our salt system. I always mispronounce this. I can't think of it right now. This is complicated.
You can't have got no chance.
But how our body monitors and maintains our salt balance, the sodium, the potassium, and so on. I think that there is an intimate interplay between those 3 things. And we know that uric acid is important to humans because we evolved this system. Around 24 million years ago, we had the beginning of uricase, the gene uricase mutations that continued to go on until up to, I think, around 2.5 million years ago, when it was all pretty much said and done, which causes humans, we overproduce uric acid. And there's a lot of argument and a lot of questions as to why we do that. Like if you look at gorillas, their uric acid, I think, maybe it's the chimpanzees, but they're very similar. They have uric acid values somewhere around 1 to 3. One of those populations is around 3 to 3.5, and the other one's at 1. I forget which one, but the humans, we have a higher amount than they do, and there are valid questions about, why. But I don't know how you feel about this, but I just don't think evolution does things. I just don't think it does stupid things. I think that there's a uric acid balance that is required in our circulatory system. And I think that we don't understand what that balance is. We don't really know. But what I do know is that the nitric oxide is super important to the health of our endothelial layer in our circulatory system, in our arteries. And when nitric oxide system is damaged, then we get endothelial damage, and we're looking at potentially heart attacks and cardiovascular disease down the road because of it. So, I don't know the answer to that. I'm worried about it. And this doctor in Israel, and Dr. Richard Johnson, he's the foremost expert on uric acid in the world. And when you talk to him, he's worried about it. He's like, I'm not really sure what you should do. I'm going to have another interview with him, and I'm going to ask him more specifically about, should I go on allopurinol or not? Because he's a medical doctor on top of researching. And I've heard, we didn't get a chance to talk about that when I interviewed him because we were deep in the weeds on this other stuff. But this time around, I want to talk to him about what his feeling is about the high uric acid, what he thinks about what's going on with that, and whether people should go on urate lowering drugs. I mean, something to think about, Tracy, is the fact that in the early 1900s, men, their average uric acid was between 3 and 3.5.
Okay.
And now men are at about 6. The average is 6. Women, I think it's a little lower for women. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's a little lower for women. The average value is. So why has that happened? Is it the protein that we're eating? I don't know the answer. I'm going to try and start picking apart at it, though.
Fascinating. And I'd imagine too, there'd be stuff that, like stress and lifestyle. I mean, we know that what that role that plays on our health as well. I mean, that sort of stuff is kind of harder to quantify, but I assume that would impact flare-ups and things like that as well. Do you ever find that? Have you ever sort of looked at that connection, with your clients or within yourself?
Oh, I know. I absolutely believe in what you're talking about now. I don't know if it contributes directly to a gout flare, but I think it can for sure have a contribution. And like in my own philosophy, I developed this idea called "makes me healthy," and in that we cover all these bases. So coming back to where we started this discussion, I believe that the gout is one possible result of our lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
A lifestyle that's really high in carbohydrates, sugar, and alcohol and all that. It's one possible consequence, just like diabetes is a possibility, and obesity, and then the cardiovascular, and then all of these other things. The migraines seem to respond to low carb diets. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, polycystic kidney disease responds too. Lipedema seems to get somewhat better. I don't want to overstep myself there, but I think it also improves.
Definitely. Yep.
So what do we know also needs to go along with all that stuff? Exactly what you said. We got to bring the stress down, because I think at the core of it, okay, I'm going to take a big risk here. I think at the core of it is mitochondrial dysfunction. And above that, we have the insulin resistance that comes from that, right? Yeah. And so what improves that? Well, we know, first off, what we've been talking about, the diet. You need to really get rid of the sugar in that business. But then after that, what's next? I mean, and I think bringing the stress down, getting the right kind of exercise, sleep, right? I've been tracking that. I've got the Oura Ring.
I saw that.
I've been messing, and I'm learning. I'm learning all kinds of things all the time, but I'm not sure what I'm learning. If you know what I mean.
It'll come to you eventually.
I know this. If I have one low carb beer that you can
a
track,
low carb beer.
2.6 carbs, but the alcohol. See, this is the thing. When we talk about the ketogenic diet, everyone's like, "Well, what can I drink?" That I don't know about you, but I have that conversation all the time, and I'm like, "Well, you got to be kind of careful with it." But they never are thinking about the alcohol. They're thinking about the carbs in there. And I was guilty of that too, but now I know better. The alcohol is just as bad.
Yeah.
It can drive diabetes. When you look at the molecular pathways, it's definitely part of that. So like what you're talking about there, the stress reduction, getting the right kind of exercise, I think all that plays a part in this. Because if you're a gout sufferer, I would be shocked if you didn't have other metabolic issues going on. It's something like 52% or 54% of gout sufferers also are type 2 diabetic. And it's 50% are significantly overweight, and a smaller percentage are afflicted by cardiovascular disease. It's like we're talking about the same thing here, really. I just think it's the epigenetic argument, right? It's how that particular individual is responding to this global environment that is assaulting them all the time.
I think that's a great way to explain it. One of the things that you must do to reduce your stress is this cave diving. I'm fascinated about it. I know it's getting close to time. I hope we got a few more minutes. I just would love to ask you. I would love to ask you, firstly, how you got into it. And I couldn't imagine doing something like that. Like, just the thought of that creates fear in my mind of being in a cave. Is that something that, you had to, like, have you always done this stuff? Have you had to overcome fear to do this? Has there ever been a situation, and I'm asking you a lot of questions, just pick what you like, because I'm just fascinated to hear what what this is like for you. I mean, have you ever been in a situation where you've got into trouble cave diving?
Well, okay, so when I was a kid, I'll try to make this really fast. When I was a kid, I had brilliant red hair, buck teeth.
Yeah.
I looked like the guy on the front of Mad Magazine. I forget what you call that guy. But anyway, I really experienced a lot of bullying and whatnot. And I was in a family with a father who was a drinker and a rageaholic, right? So, and I don't want to get into my mother had her own stuff. They were quite the interesting dynamic. In any case, I felt pretty useless as a human being growing up as a kid. And I felt like I couldn't do anything right. And I was picked on a lot. I'm not a victim, all right? I don't live like a victim, but I'm just trying to give you the background.
Yeah, of course.
I was kicked out of first grade for whacking a kid over the head with a chair. So let me just say that my parents sent me away. They were done with me when I turned 11, right? And they sent me to the summer camp in Wyoming, and it was back in it was 1969. And maybe you've experienced some of this. Things were different back then. People did things with kids that you couldn't do now. You would be too afraid to get sued. But in any case, I spent the first time I ever spent a night on a 1,000-foot wall, I was 12 years old, and we almost didn't make it through that situation. It was an amazing epic. To come back to the cave diving, what happened with that epic was that I realized when I went home, and I went back to this camp, I started to work for these guys until I was in my mid-20s. And then I got into the climbing because really hardcore. By the time I was 23, you wouldn't be amazed at what I'd gone through by then. But in any case, what I learned and what I took home with me was that I was good at something. I could suffer, and I could get through these incredibly scary things. And when I looked around a classroom, all these kids were picking on me. At that point, I was like, yeah, and none of you would have made it through that night. Had you been there, I know who would have been bawling their eyes out, and it wasn't me. I survived, and I did that. And so, later on, a lot of life passed, and I went through a divorce, and it was pretty messy. There's a lot of things I've learned in my life. I had to straighten out a lot of things with myself. I mean, life is a project, right? Anyway,
Totally.
my daughter was with me during the summers, and that was here in Phoenix where it's 115 degrees. And I'd always wanted to scuba dive my whole life. So I took some lessons. I brought her, we did that together, and it was a father-daughter thing. And we started diving on the reefs in Mexico and other places. And as I learned about diving, I was doing a lot of reading, and because of my background in climbing, like I got into doing first ascents, and by the time I was learned to cave dive, I'd done about 400 first ascents in the Western United States. A lot of adventure. And so with that background, I started reading a lot about the diving, and these guys are wreck diving and they're cave diving. That's where the action was. And the more I read, the more I became interested in cave diving. So I went to Florida and I got trained for it. And then I spent a couple of years just sort of like gaining some experience with it. And then I went to Mexico. And the way I got to Mexico for this was that I saw a YouTube video of this Austrian instructor who was doing the most extreme training in the world at that time to go into the smallest unexplored caves in the Yucatan. And so I saw this YouTube video and I was like, okay, I don't know where that guy is. And I tracked him down in Mexico, but I'm going to go wherever he is and I'm going to get trained. And so I did that. And the training was like, I didn't think I was going to get through it. There were some things that we did, like I had to pass more or less. I had to be able to exchange a regulator on a tank fully submerged, where there's a point where you have to hold your breath and transfer the regulator from one tank to the other and then breathe off of it. And I came pretty close to failing out of that because I couldn't manage to get that done before nearly drowning and having to bolt for the surface. But anyway, I did get through it. And then I started, doing some of the most extreme caves in the Yucatan. And I think my attraction to that was, number one, going places where people have never been before. Humans have not been in these caves. And even if you're diving one that somebody else has been there ahead of you, maybe that's 5 or 10 parties or something. Some of the caves that I go into, and some of those caves nobody had ever been into. I finally got to explore some caves that no one had ever dove. And I think the attraction for me is the adventure. And to answer the last question that you asked about, have I ever been in a situation in the cave? Well, caves are different. Cave diving is different than rock climbing. If you get a couple thousand meters deep inside a submerged cave and you have something catastrophic happen, you're not going to come out. There's just no possible way that you're going to survive that. So cave diving requires a much higher level of preparation and redundancy and all of these things, right? And using judgment to turn around when you don't feel right about something, or so I have not had any of those experiences like that. I mean, yeah, I have not, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Wow. I just think if you can do stuff like that, life's easy. You must be able to I don't mean to say life's easy, but you can confront anything, right? If you have been through what you've been through, then, the world can just throw whatever at you, and you, Dr. Pete, will work it out.
Well, I would say to you and your viewers, I think that between the climbing and the cave diving, what it's taught me about life is that it's a process, and you just don't give up. You put one foot in front of the other. And when you do that, when you put one foot in front of the other, eventually you're going to get where you want to go. You just, not giving up, being careful, thinking things through, and not being afraid to fail, by the way. You need
Big
to be
one.
willing to fail. And I've already failed trying to do what I do now, the coaching and everything, just trying to make a go of this. You know what I mean? You do it forward,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. All right,
Yep.
let's
Yep.
try something
Change
else.
it.
Yep.
Yep. We've all got to do that. You can't, 100%. You can't master anything unless you try a whole lot of different things. But I love what you said too about listening. You can't do cave diving unless you're connected to, your intuition that knows when it's not going to work, or, to go forward or back. And I think that's so relevant in life as well. And it's just been wonderful to talk to you. What an amazing, inspirational person you are. It's been highly entertaining, highly knowledgeable. I think anyone who was listening who has had gout or knows someone that has gout will really, really enjoyed it, and just your story too. Can't thank you enough. It's been a pleasure to meet you and chat with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It was an awesome opportunity, and I'm glad that we're reconnecting after the Nutrition Network. It's awesome.
Yes, so let's do it again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Have a good night.